these people from these agencies saying really smart things out in the world on LinkedIn, and you're like, where was that? Like, where was that stroke of genius when we were doing it? The problem is the process. It's not the people or the talent. There's talent everywhere. I just think you have to have a relationship, and you have to have a process that allows freedom and agility of ideas to flourish.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am your host, your sponsor, your everything, Daniel Weiner. You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for marketing and tech needs, because finding great partners is a giant pain in the ass. I am joined today by my guy, Tom Spaven, who is VP of Marketing at Goodwipes. We also just found out, Tom, before you even do an intro, Tom doesn't use multiple screens. We just found out, throwing him under the bus already. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. I thought you said no throwing anyone under the bus.
Only each other. You said only yourself and myself.
Only ourselves. Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Yeah. No, you're right. I'm just a one screen guy trying to focus, you know.
That's good. I like the answer. We'll dive right in. What is your outside of multiple screens? What's your unpopular opinion or hot take of sorts in the marketing world?
So, I mean, I think the hot take that I'm going to bring is that, you know, everyone in marketing is and has always been just winging it. How about that?
No, please elaborate. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these popular themes we see, that everything's changing all the time. And I think there's a tendency for marketing, for anyone at any level, to feel overwhelmed. And as such, I think there's a behavior in the industry now which I don't love, which is just everyone trying to pretend that they're an expert at everything. And realistically, that's impossible, right? Marketing is so broad now. The expectations of anyone sort of director level and above is that they are perfect at every aspect of it. And it's just not possible. So one thing that I like to dispel is this myth, you know, that a marketing director or VP or a CMO is just this pro at everything. You're not. You have to hire where the gaps are. And I know what I'm good at and what I suck at. And it's been liberating, I think, in the last few years to kind of confront that and be vulnerable with that, because you really just, you know, opens up the possibility to hire really well. So yeah, but anyone who says they're good at everything is lying, I'm afraid.
Full of shit. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the biggest takeaway for me of working for myself and doing the whole entrepreneurial journey is when I first started and I would talk to like CMOs or VPs of marketing at relatively like well-known companies. I was like, oh, they're going to know everything. Like, what am I doing on this phone call? How did I get in this room? And to your point, like, no one knows what they're doing. Like, everybody is smart at that level, but I find like my most candid and fun conversations with CMOs is similar to you when they're like, I have no clue. Like, the internet and technology has changed everything. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, how do we figure this out? And they're the best at admitting that and finding partners, whether that's full-time employees, agencies, freelancers, to take on that burden and hire smarter than themselves in certain areas. I don't know what I'm doing any day of the week with this thing. So luckily it's going reasonably well, but yeah, I don't think anybody knows what they're doing either.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why you hire agencies sometimes.
Yeah, thank you for the plug, Tom. We appreciate it.
Hey, that's not like you yet.
Yeah, not me yet, just agencies in general. But that's good. That benefits all of us. You lead marketing at Goodwipes at the moment, but you cut your teeth at some pretty large consumer-facing brands. I know L'Oreal, Bacardi. Tell us a little bit about the journey and kind of what's been the biggest shift for you personally, I guess, in working for quote-unquote mature companies that, you know, people have ever heard of to more of like a startup atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, the journey's been pretty broad and varied. I mean, that's worth mentioning. I think I started off even before kind of jumping into big CPG and these kind of behemoths that you mentioned, that I started very small and choppy at the beginning of my career, which I would recommend to anybody starting out, is to try different things when you're in your early 20s or even before that, because you just get a sense of what you're good at, what fills your cup, the kind of people you like to work with, and just the amount that you learn just from even being somewhere for 3 months is extraordinary, right? So I worked as a concierge in a hotel. I worked at a creative agency in Spain for a little bit. I worked on a sports desk, like writing tennis results in the middle of the night. And, and I worked as a recruitment consultant. These were all in like tiny increments of time. And I started to freak out, that, well, where was I going? But realistically, looking back, that was incredibly formative, because you have so many experiences in a short space of time. But yeah, eventually I got into L'Oreal in London at the management training scheme, grad scheme, whatever you want to call it. I think P&G do a big one here. And that was sort of my marketing career up and running. It's funny, you mentioned L'Oreal and Bacardi. I actually never worked directly on L'Oreal Paris or Bacardi Rum, like the most famous brands, the names above the door. I was on sort of smaller luxury brands like Kiehl's, some of the fragrance brands within the portfolio of L'Oreal. And, that really taught me about, the power of brand and consistency and premium and luxury, which I've taken with me throughout my career. And then, moving into Bacardi, it was, alcohol, probably something that at the time I was closely, had a close affinity to. I was young and wanted to travel the world and learn about spirits marketing, which is actually quite similar to fragrance marketing if you think about some of the codes of that category. Yeah, great experience. But I wanted to shift into startups. This was 2021. This is after about 15 years working in those companies. And, I know myself, and I know that I'm someone who likes momentum all the time and doesn't like things stagnating or slowing down. And, big companies don't always operate as quickly as you want. And I wanted to test myself in the startup world. So I went to a tequila seltzer startup called Volley. The clean tequila seltzer, just 3 ingredients. Cool experience. They're still going strong. Shout out Chris and Camila.
What's the third ingredient? Tequila seltzer and what? Water?
Tequila, 100% agave tequila, sparkling water, and organic juice. Nothing else. Yeah. It's almost too clean for its own good. You have to flip the can to spread the juice out, because there's no stabilizers, no preservatives. It's a really extraordinary product. But
maybe they want to sponsor the podcast. We can get some free tequila over here.
Hey, well, I'm sure I can get you some. Yeah, it's great. If you're a real tequila fan, it's fantastic.
Hey, I'm a real tequila fan.
And then, I mean, I moving to startups, you realize that you chop out all of the wonderful things like job security and business class travel, all these wonderful things I took for granted.
Tom, no one has job security these days.
That's true.
I don't think that matters where you are.
No, that's true. But it's been invigorating. And, Goodwipes is a fantastic company with, strong leadership, servant leadership. And at that point, I just knew what to look for and who to work for. And it's fun building a brand in a sort of quite sterile clinical category and trying to build something very playful and exuberant. And there's a lot of upside and a lot of headroom for growth. So it's a good time.
What's been the biggest shift for you? Or I'm curious if there has been a shift when I think of like the brands you mentioned. They're, people know them, and you're not fighting an uphill battle of education oftentimes, I presume. With something like Goodwipes, how are you thinking of just the consumer in terms of like many people presumably haven't heard of it, or maybe they don't even know the category exists? Right. How do you guys approach that?
Completely different. I mean, if you're working on a household sort of legendary brand like Bombay Sapphire, Grey Goose, your main job there is to drive relevance. You're not driving awareness. Everybody knows it. No, the issue is no one's thinking about it, or not enough people are thinking about it, and it's not top of mind and relevant. So very different strategies required. When you have a 1% brand awareness in a category that has about 7 or 8% penetration, it's a completely different job. Sure. It's more exciting because you're essentially going out into the world to introduce yourself to an audience that doesn't really think about it or care necessarily. So it's like, how do you do that? So very different challenge. I think it's a more exciting challenge because you've got to kind of muscle your way in. Sure. And drive attention. And that's what really forces you, I think, to be more creative and be the purple cow, as Seth Godin would say.
Yeah. With economy in flux, what's your kind of advice or I guess maybe opinion to other marketing leaders? You know, when consumers aren't spending, how do you get the most out of your marketing dollars? What should they be doing? What should they be thinking about? How are you thinking about budgets and stuff like that in this kind of weird time we're in?
Big question and a good one. I hesitate to always say good question because
Yeah, don't give me any credit, Tom.
I would actually say that consumers are spending. I mean, we're pockets are tight, but consumers are spending.
Sure.
I think that it can sometimes be an excuse to blame the economy. And look, there's obvious challenges in the economy when you look at poverty levels in the US and when people are struggling to pay the rent, that's a huge issue. And we don't shy away from that. But I will say that if you are a brand that can drive relevance and find a way to make people feel good, like people will still come. They will shift spending around. We all know about, well, I don't know if we all know about it, but a familiar phrase in the kind of luxury world is the lipstick index. Have you heard of that?
I've not.
I mean, it's basically the dynamic where in a recession, people still want to treat themselves, but they just can't necessarily afford a Prada purse. They're going to go for the Prada lipstick instead. They're going to trade down, but they're going to still seek out that element of self-care. And I think that it just puts more pressure on brands to drive relevance and be relevant in a target occasion and meet consumers where they are. But people will still come, even if things are tight. You can't go through your week or your month without engaging with a brand or buying a brand that makes you feel good. There are different ways to do it. So we think we've found a good alchemy to do that. But yeah, it just means you've got to be more creative. You just got to be better.
No, I like that. What's your overall opinion on agencies? Since that's my world, how do they fit into the ecosystem at Goodwipes?
So 2 questions there. Overall opinion on agencies. I mean, I've never worked at a brand that hasn't worked with an agency.
Agencies are very polarizing in my world. Like if you say the word agencies around folks with your title, often I get like sick of agencies
I know.
And stuff like that. Just like an overall exhaustion is more the point of the first part of the question. I'm curious if you're very pro or just, I don't know, it's a necessary evil is what I hear as well from some folks in your shoes. Probably
somewhere in between. I mean, so I do think you get out. I think we'll get into this. I think you get out what you put in with agencies. And,
sure.
I always come back to the point that, the reason you would work with an agency is either because you don't know how to do something yourself or you just don't have time, right? Or probably a combination of the two.
Sure.
And you've got to be so conscious of why you go into an agency relationship. Like, what are you solving for? And I do think if anyone's from an agency listening, they'll probably nod their head, but clients don't always know what they want. Sometimes they might just be grandfathered into an agency relationship or, sleepwalk into it, not know what they're asking for. And so you got to really be clear on what your needs are and what you can cover internally. And that comes from having, an annual strategy, probably, hopefully a longer term strategy about how you want to build brand. But yeah, I mean, I've had wonderful agency relationships in my career. What I always try and do is manage you have to manage the relationship. It's not something that you just turn on and will always deliver for you. Like, agencies have limited capacity and resource.
Sure.
So if you suck as a client, you're going to get the B team or the C team. So you really get what you put in. So yeah, I think it's just all about, really identifying what your needs are and laying that out and being transparent with an agency, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But
yeah, we will. I'm curious with your title. This is maybe my favorite question of the podcast that I ask everybody. Everybody with your title, even director level, director, VP, and especially CMO are getting hit up like, I don't know, every 12 seconds via every single channel, apparently. LinkedIn, text, phone, all the things, email, by agencies and vendors selling to them. Is that the case for you?
That is the case.
How do you manage it? I hear it's become even more overwhelming than usual. I interviewed who you know as well, Kaylin Durham, who is CMO of Aaron's, yesterday for the podcast, and she told a war story of getting an iPad in the mail from a vendor, and when she opened it up, it was video of the person's face, like talking to her and stuff.
That's not bad. I wouldn't mind that.
So this is the point. My whole theory of this entire world, which is why You Should Talk To exists, is you got to know your audience. You would love the iPad
Yes.
with the video talking to you. Do you just
Whoever
want the
you
iPad?
are, whoever you are, if you're listening, redirect your direct mail my way. I'll take it.
I'll get the information from Kalen of who it was and see if we can get you a free iPad. But no, I am curious if there is anything that any vendor like that or agency can do when you are not in buying mode, cold, that will pique your interest and encourage you to take a call, or not really, unless you're in that mode of buying, which you would of course call me first. So probably not, right?
Of course I would call you. Why would I need anybody else?
That's what I'm saying, you know?
It's tough because there aren't enough hours in the day to engage every cold outreach. But I imagined a world the other day where there was none. And I also didn't like that.
Yeah.
Because then you're kind of like, maybe it's a FOMO thing. But like, it's just part and parcel of being a head of marketing, or really probably head of any department, right? There are agencies for everything these days, but you've got to stand out. You've got to be a good marketer to be on the agency side, because you have to drive attention, stand out, and solve a problem. Now, some of it is down to luck. Some of it's down to, and this hopefully doesn't make me sound like some sort of diva, but it does sometimes depend what mood you're in on the day.
100%.
Like if you have
if you're a diva, we're all divas then, because that's 100% the case.
Right, but they've got to have an element of luck in catching you at the right time. I think that it's often down to, trying to understand what's going on the client side. There are so many examples of bad outreach where sometimes they even get the name wrong at the top of the email. I mean, get the basics right. Right? It's obvious when it's a copy paste, right? And that doesn't make anyone feel heard or feel special. At the end of the day, we're all human and we want to feel special. So you've got to inject an element of personalization to it. But if you can, and I would say the standard has gone up across the board, because people obviously have the ability to dig under the hood now and look at data, and they can actually provide insight to you, before even you've had a conversation. But the problem is the sheer volume of it is overwhelming. So you miss a lot. I'm absolutely sure I've missed some great opportunities with great people who could have solved problems, but I've missed it because they just kind of became part of the furniture, or it was a bad day or whatever it was, or it went straight to my junk email. But I was trying to think about when I picked up the phone and like what caused me to do that. And it just depends. There's no formula for it, right? So it's not easy, but I think you've got to have an element of humility and humor. I think with any sort of outreach, you've got to have the luck of catching someone on the right channel at the right time. You could be browsing LinkedIn at the right moment. But yeah, I don't want a world where it's not happening. Put it that way. It's a necessary evil. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. And, it can depend on the alchemy of the day, I would say.
I like that. No, I totally agree. Let's say that you are in buying mode. You've decided, hey, I'm looking for something. What, like in general, if you had to sum it up, are you looking for from an agency or vendor? Like once you start talking to them, how can they stand out?
Obviously, depending on the topic, different needs. But I would say that it ultimately, just with anything in business, comes down to the quality of a relationship, the quality of the human, which of course is not easy to judge from the first interaction. But I was talking to an agency this week about this, and we had a few conversations with them, and they had done everything right on paper, right? The deck was beautiful, said all the right things, the people were buttoned up, but there was something missing, right? And it wasn't that I don't need the services, but there was just something that I wasn't feeling. And I was very honest with the owner. I said, look, this doesn't feel right. And I know that that's not very clear feedback, or you can't really that's not actionable feedback for you. But I think it had to do with the level of empathy and really understanding where we were in our journey. And I don't know if there's enough people working on the agency side who have been a client. And the reason for that, obviously, is that agency work is so specialized, and you look at sort of generalist brand management, people, and you think, well, they can't really fit. But I wonder if agencies could benefit on the sales side with more people who have just been in the weeds with CFOs and planning, and who can speak the language more. Because at the end of the day, like what I would want an agency to ask me is, what's keeping your CFO up at night? Like, what are you having to show her or him to get you through the next 3 months? And how can I help with that? Like, I think a question like that would, my ears would prick, and I'd be like, wow, this is an extraordinary.
You're going to get that. You're going to get that in your email on LinkedIn now from all the people listening.
Maybe, yeah. I was like, yeah, who's listening? Prove who's listening. But you know, what's, it's not really what's keeping me up at night. It's what's keeping the bean counters up at night.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to your point about, you know, it didn't feel right. I totally agree. And I think too many people in your shoes sign contracts with vendors or partners that don't feel right. You know, I talk like there's like 90,000 agencies in the US alone. And when people are in your shoes are looking for an agency in general, they talk to like 3 to 5 for normal to small stuff, and then maybe like 5 to 7 for bigger stuff. I generally advise at the end sometimes, like with clients I'm working with, of like, oh, like they're great, similar to you. Like, you know, everything on paper seems good, but like, I don't know, it feels a little off. We're not sure. And my response is usually like, this could be the worst decision of your life. But on the front end, when you sign, you should be really excited. It could all fall apart a week later. But like on the front end, when you sign that thing and you fork over a bunch of money, like you should be really excited and comfortable about like the promise of, you know, what can happen. And I usually encourage, I'm like, then you should have more conversations. And largely, unfortunately, I get the response like, we don't have time.
Yes.
Like, well, it's going to cause a lot more time if you guys fire each other and
it's
like it doesn't
hiring,
work out.
Isn't it? Yeah. It's like hiring when you go through 5 or 6 candidates and there comes this panic where you need to hire to just tick the box and get on with everything else, which that's when you make the mistake, isn't it? That's when, you know, you do something in the short term that feels good, but you're just going to hamstring yourself. It's the time thing is everything. So another thing I told this person this week was the admin that their team requested from us to even get a proposal together. I understand why, but I was like, that's too much. And this is the problem, right? Because they're trying to do rigorous work and they are asking the right questions of us. But I was like, I literally have no time to do this. So this isn't going to work. I'm sorry. And I was like, look, I'm so sorry because, you know, this is all valid. This is all logically valid, but I cannot get you that because I don't have a team. Like one of the guys on my team's out. I've got one in-house creative. We're not able to deliver something for Walmart next week. So I'm out. We're cut. Sorry. Let's pick it up and, you know, pick it up next quarter. Classic, you know, when can we get time in? But yeah, it's like sometimes we don't have time. So it's very hard. I do empathize and I would really try and like never sort of be short with anyone. I mean, I ignore a lot, but I would never sort of like shit on anyone for trying to get on my calendar. I would say that like a phone call out of the blue at the wrong time isn't always great. Occasionally, like a phone call on the cell out of the blue at the wrong time can be really annoying. But I'm also imagining a world where that never happens. And I'm like, how it's so tough. Like, how do you catch someone? So the only time I might ever be a bit of an asshole is if I'm imagining I've got a 5-minute break and I've stepped outside to try and get some air, to try and prepare for my next meeting. And then someone calls me to pitch something. I'm like, sorry, I haven't got time for this right now.
I hate the phone. To the point of knowing your audience, like I'm under the opinion cold calling is dead, but apparently it is not. Like I see so much about the cold calling and people having success and power to them. Like I just hate it so much when random people call me that I can't bring myself to do it to other people.
I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's tough. I don't love it.
I've seen a bigger shift, especially since COVID, a little before, since I came from a smaller agency, of bigger name brands moving towards smaller independent agencies specialized in like 1 to 2 services. I'm curious what was it like, you know, working on Kiehl's, working on some other luxury brands in the fragrance space? You know, were you working with humongous holding company agencies, you know, and now are you working with smaller agencies? Like, what's your preference in terms of the type of agency you're usually looking for?
I mean, the shift from big to small is not surprising. It's only going to continue. But yeah, a lot of my big CPG days were working with the giants in many ways it was great because you obviously benefit from media buying power that smaller shops can't, do. But it was really the lack of agility and the excess bureaucracy that I would struggle with. So there were so many agencies at the same time. And what was hard was kind of managing an IAT, right? The classic sort of, you got your PR and you got your shopper marketing and your media and your creative, and just trying to get them to speak the same language was hard enough. So I do understand the shift towards a smaller shop that can perhaps not necessarily be more specialist, but just be leaner. And you got more chance of interacting and working with a founder. How many times have we spoken to an amazing agency CEO, head of growth, and then the moment you get going, you're working with a very junior account person who then after 3 months has either left the company or shifted to a bigger client. And perhaps that's indicative of how I was as a client. But what you want is a long-term relationship with an agency who you can grow with at the right level. I love it when agencies say that they don't want to be big because they don't want to have to take on, 13, 14 new staff within a year just to service, an AT&T or whatever it was. Like, they don't want to do that. Like, life's too short for that, because then you've got to manage 15 human beings.
It's funny. I work with agencies.
Jobs.
I work with some agencies who have told me that, and I even have one. I won't name who they are, but they have like a number in their name, and that was intentional. They didn't want to grow beyond that. They've like doubled since. And so I hear that a lot from agencies. But then if they do good work, like they can't say no, and it's hard to like not. Like that's the organic growth side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that agencies interview clients as well. Like, of course, I mean, that's always happened, but we've got to be conscious of that, right? Like, they don't have to take you on. Like, why would they want to work with an asshole client? Like, life is too short. I think we've all evaluated the full picture in the last few years about what makes us happy, and hopefully that will continue, because why should you have to take on a client? It's not a God-given right that a client has to be able to pick agencies. Like, I like that agencies interview us, and I want to put on a good show. And you have to manage a relationship with an agency just like you manage a personal relationship. Like, you've got to put the time in, you've got to keep it going, reward, and fill their cup just as much as they kind of service you. So yeah, I mean, smaller shops, you're more likely to have the relationship and for it to be a partnership.
I can't remember who posted it. I saw a quote recently. I don't think they came up with it, but they equated it to agency world. It was, the grass is not always greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. And I do find a lot of folks I talk to, like, the second things go awry with an agency, their first reaction is, let's fire them, let's get a new one. And that is the case sometimes, but like, it's often better to invest in your current partners as well, which goes against my own best interest. But I do think marketers are quick to cut ties a lot more. You don't hear when I hear of brands who've worked with agencies for like 2 years now, I'm like, oh my God, like that's crazy retention, and back in the day, you've heard brands working with the same agency for 10, 15, 20 years in some case.
Yeah, what you want really more than just like the brand and the agency, you want to work with the same team within an agency. That's what really matters, because you could work with an agency 15 years, but have gone through 50 teams. That's not going to be a good reflection of anyone, and the work will suffer. I think
the people at the agency make up the agency. Agency matters significantly less, in my opinion.
Right. And you want to, and there's a reason people follow people to new agencies, because you just build a way of working and understanding with certain people, and there are people that I would and will follow wherever they go, and I'd like to think it was reciprocated, just because you could just do it, like you understand each other and get into this kind of fluency together. But yeah, you definitely have to invest in it, to make it work.
Sure. We'll move on to the fun portion where we talk some shit. Do you want to do the positive agency experience or your negative agency experience first? I give everybody a choice.
Let's start with a positive. Why don't we do that?
That's what we like to hear. All right. What's a great agency experience you've had, past or present, and what made it so positive?
I will say that there was a project that I led when I was working on Grey Goose at part of Bacardi with an agency called Ragged Edge in London, who are a design agency founded by, a guy who's now a great friend of mine. Like, he was at my wedding, and I think that's testament to how we work together. But it was a brand standard visual identity packaging, point of sale, barware, whole thing, start to finish. And we did it intensely, we did it quickly, and that required quick decision making, and some conflict, like healthy conflict, which we managed to navigate really well because there was trust as a foundation. And I think that's the key, isn't it? You have to trust each other to be able to have the right conflict to get to a better solution. Sure. And, it's kind of been held up. It has been held up in the industry as a great example of partnership execution, results, delivery. So I always look back at that as a kind of bookended, project that I love. I will always want to work with them again in some capacity. They've gone on to become famous and very expensive. So I now
you can't afford them now, I was going to say.
But yeah, rightfully. But Max,
they won't take your call. That's how it should be.
Yeah, I'm always ringing. I'm like Max. He keeps screaming. He's like, "Come on, leave me alone." No, but it was. I mean, it's just. I think the key there was trust and passion, and getting to a shared language, and just knowing exactly what we were aiming for and sharing that vision. So yeah, it was cool. I'm very proud of it. Would love to do something like that again one day. And
I was going to say to other marketing leaders maybe struggling to get to that point, or they haven't had a lot of experience working with agencies, what's your advice to them on how to get the best out of your partners? Is it increased? You like collaboration? You want to be told what to do? Somewhere in between? What's your advice to them?
I honestly think it is to start on a completely level playing field. Think of it as a partnership where they're in-house, you're in their house, and it is a relationship that you work on together. If there isn't a foundation of trust and transparency there, you are not going to get the performance from the agency. And you're not, and I think a lot of it comes from just enjoying it. So being vulnerable, sharing everything that you can share with them. Agencies do want to see more than you think, right? They want to see the context behind a brief. If they're good, they want to know the financials. They want to know, it's not just about the budgets, right? Of course, that has to be squared away, but it's really not. It's about what the strategy is, and they'll be able to help. Like the amazing thing about agencies is they get to work with so many different businesses and different industries, and actually have an incredible knowledge of different categories, and can actually add value if you let them. But for me, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you get out what you put in. So you really have to invest in the relationship. But also be honest with yourself when it doesn't feel right. And, is this person going to end up being a friend of mine at the end of the day? Like, you have to work with people who you would go for dinner with and not feel like it was a chore or like it was a meeting. Like, you want to be able to enjoy the time, because out of that relationship will come trust and transparency and humor and all of the things you need to just develop great work. Honestly, like
if you don't end up in Tom's wedding, you were not a true.
That's the whole goal. Yeah. Also, hopefully, I've only had one wedding, and I will only.
That's what I'm going to say. I wasn't going to say.
No, you never know. But
you came to my dinner on your anniversary, so don't ever do that again. But
no, well, that may send me down the path of having.
I was going to say. No, I was honored. Let's do the negative now. Tell me about hopefully horrific. We love a little bit of drama here. Tell me about a negative agency experience you've had and what made it so negative.
I'll tell you about. Yeah, I obviously won't name any names, but I will tell you about a negative overall experience that involved an agency. This will ring familiar to a lot of people, but big companies, there are sometimes too many steps and too many people involved in developing something fairly simple, right? So in this particular case, it was, shopper marketing, point of sale development on some big brands. And, essentially, it took 12 weeks to get from a briefing to basically a poster, which even now, like, it just seems absurd when you think about what can be achieved through like an AI, literally for free.
I'll make you a poster today in Canva.
Yeah. And I won't tell you how much it cost, but
we got to know, Tom. Give us the budget. I love these things. Like $100,000. Give me something.
I'm gonna tell you that it was north of that. It's an eye-watering amount of money, but really just because of the bureaucracy and the people involved. So everyone's got to have an opinion. So what happens then? And the edges get filed off a good idea. You get Frankenstein design, and of course, what comes back is actually garbage because too many people have looked at it. It's drifted away from the original brief and the original vision. So then ironically, you end up actually, I remember at one point, I hate to admit this, but I actually created one myself that overruled what came back through this clunky process. Of course, it pissed everybody off because it's just not what you do, right? You don't do it, but
you then charged them $100,000.
You're right. Fired them. No, I mean, you just go through this. You go through this process. It's just a negative experience because I don't think anyone actually is enjoying it. It doesn't reflect well on the agency. I don't think they're proud of the work. And it's funny because you see these people from these agencies saying really smart things out in the world on LinkedIn, and you're like, where was that? Like, where was that stroke of genius when we were doing it? The problem is the process. It's not the people or the talent. There's talent everywhere. I just think you have to have a relationship and you have to have a process that allows freedom and agility of ideas to flourish, which is obviously incredibly difficult when you have large, complex, organizations. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, I hope to never go through anything like that again.
Ethical person that I am, I can remember my former agency working on a big brand, something similar, not a poster, but a small deliverable, and the budget was obscene, and we kept making update after update because they would rope in like a new person or team to like every meeting. And I remember we were like, we wanted a long-term relationship, of course. We were like, this is getting like fiscally irresponsible of us to continue doing this. Like, it's insane. And I called them, and I will never forget. I was like, hey, like, we love the billables, but like, this is getting a little ridiculous. Like, are you guys sure you want to spend this? Like, this is where we're at currently. I'll never forget. They're like, yeah, just bills. Doesn't matter.
No accountability. Yeah. No, just it's an abuse of shareholder capital. I mean, it's absurd. But when, if you're far removed from it, unfortunately, that's what happens. But hey, good for you for calling it out. But then if they agree to it,
I'm mostly money grubbing. Don't worry, I will never do that again. But in that scenario, yes, it felt ridiculous.
Wow, that's amazing.
Overall, what do you think something agencies oftentimes get wrong, or something you wish they got more?
I mean, it's never just clean cut agency getting it wrong. It is because of some issue in the process. I wish that they would sometimes, I think I'll come back to it, I wish they would sometimes understand a bit more of the holistic picture of what's going on behind the scenes. And again, it comes back to but then clients don't always invite them in to understand that. So if an agency is trying to get on your books to discuss something that is relatively unimportant in that week, it's not the agency's fault. That's the client's fault. But yeah, they sometimes get it wrong. They'll sometimes, I would say, overestimate the importance of something in the context of what the client might be dealing with, which is hard to deal with. But it's not really their fault. Like, I think the one thing that agencies consistently get wrong is overcomplicating things. So I'm a keep it simple person. I think that you really can demonstrate you understand something if you can say it in one sentence or put it on one slide. And there is a quite annoying culture of just more is more everywhere. And often that is a proxy for, showing rigor and being knowledgeable. But I just don't believe that anymore. Like, I don't have time for heavy slides, text, phone calls.
It justifies the retainer often. It looks like you did bullshit. More.
That doesn't work for me anymore. I think it's working less and less. I think that, we had an incredible guy come to the office this week, very famous, for like top Fortune 15 CEO. And how relaxed he was and how top line he was on everything was remarkable, right? This is a guy who doesn't need the detail, has the ability to simplify and kind of cut through. And that's what you want to aim for. You want to be able to get everything to the point where you can, if you're in an elevator with someone like that, you can tell them what's up and keep them interested, right? You can see when these people start to switch off because you're talking too much. And I just think everyone needs to just slow down and say less and get to the point and think more about what is being said and written. I think the world will be a better place. The world of marketing would be a much better place.
Sure.
That. So yeah.
What are you most excited about in the marketing space at the moment? We've got artificial intelligence
AI
everywhere. Yeah, I was going to say. I think that gets me more views if we just mention AI a bunch.
Mention AI, yeah, to get it in there. I am actually excited about AI. I was playing around with a friend on this app, and I was like, well, design me a craft beer that was designed by a samurai warrior. And this thing was unbelievable. It was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and it was created in 15 seconds. But no, I don't think the thing that I'm most excited about is the gradual shifting of the pendulum back to brand building. I think we've seen peak performance bullshit now. And what I mean by that is, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in performance. Like, show me a marketer that doesn't want their brand to perform, right? This whole notion of like brand versus performance, I think is silly. I think it's misleading. I say this as many opportunities as I can. Every opportunity is a chance to build brand and a chance to perform. Like, you have to think about it holistically. But the Airbnb shifted back to brand and are starting to see long-term gains from that. I just think that you have to embed brand building and some sort of long-term thinking into your planning, and have to have that belief that you are servicing something for the longer term. So I'm excited about that. I've always believed in it because of where I've come from and my training. And I work for people that believe in it. So that's an exciting development, which I hope to see more of.
And my final marketing question for you, I think the answer is, you can't actually, don't tell me your CFO is the answer, but what keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint?
Yeah, not the CFO anymore. No, he's good. It depends what day of the week it is. The jobs are so varied, but increasingly I think it's more of the human stuff. Like, it's more about the team and how they are, and what, if someone in your direct kind of duty of care is not good, right? Mentally, physically, that is the number one priority, because obviously that's just more important at a human level, but it also means that you can't perform and that you're going to end up with issues as a team. But yeah, it's things like relationships, and I still get put out if people behave not unethically, but I just think, if people, are kind of out of line, out of pocket, I just think there's no time for that anymore. I think we've all got less patience for that. Insincerity, things like that. I just think I call it out now. So I'll stay up at night thinking about it, and I will probably then deal with it the next day sort of fairly swiftly, because I just think culture is everything in an organization. And if it starts to rot, that's it. That's trouble, because then it's just going to drive the wrong behaviors. So keeping the culture and values in line is what keeps me up at night, and what keeps companies performing in the long term. So, yeah.
Sure. No, that's a good answer. We'll finish with a couple fun ones. What was your very first job?
I can't remember exactly, but it's so long ago. But the one I remember was I was doing a summer job at the British Embassy in Stockholm in Sweden, where we lived when I was a teenager.
It's a cool first job.
But I was gardening.
Okay.
Which I just remember it because it was just,
this is why you're so relaxed all the time. You're gardening, you live in Serenbe. I mean, you've got the most relaxing life there is.
That's right. Just this farm life. But I was gardening. I remember I was very bad at it. And I remember this guy that was kind of leading, and he was sort of ordering me around. I remember him teaching me how to use a shovel. And then he looked at me, and he's observed that I have a very long torso. And I was like, what do you mean? I've never really been aware. I was 16 at the time. I guess I was going through all sorts of biological changes. And he observed that I wasn't the right shape for doing that job. He was like, it's not going to work. You're going to hurt your back. And I'll never forget that. I was like, well, maybe I'm destined for an office job.
I was hoping the end of that was, you'll never make it as a gardener. You should go into marketing.
Pretty much. I mean, basically that. Maybe that was the most pivotal moment in my career, when he told me I was the wrong shape for outdoor manual labor.
You're right where you're supposed to be. You ended up being that right spot. What would your final meal be?
Final meal, Dishoom in London, Indian restaurant. I don't know if you've ever been. Phenomenal. I'd go there.
I love Indian food, though.
Yeah, I'd go there for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on my final day on this earth.
Okay. And then my final question, who is somebody who inspires you, either personally, professionally, or both?
I mean, I look back at some incredible bosses that I've had that have an extraordinary, disproportionate effect on your life without you realizing it at the time, just in terms of how to behave, how to be effective at work. But I will say, maybe this is a little cheesy, but as anyone who is a single parent inspires me. Like, I'm a dad of a 3-year-old, happily married, but it's hard, right? Whenever I see anyone parenting on their own, I think that's the hardest job in the world. I don't think there's anybody more resilient and important in the world than people doing that. So I tip my hat off to them, and they do inspire me because they're essentially bringing up tomorrow's generation. So yeah, they get a shout out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know how anybody, parents in general, watching my brother chase around 2 kids with his wife all the time. I'm like, when do you guys do you guys ever sleep? They're like, nah,
no,
sleep. So.
No, sleep when you're dead.
That's the spirit. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. For anybody out there, where do they find it? Goodwipes.com, I presume. Any specials, any coupon codes? Where do you want them to go? In store, anywhere?
Goodwipes.com to learn more about us. You can buy online, but we're nationally distributed in retail, so check us out in Target, Walmart, Kroger. Follow us at Goodwipes on the socials. Give our TikTok a good follow. We do some pretty chaotic, unhinged stuff on there, so have a good laugh. So yeah.
Good. Awesome. We will talk to you soon, Tom, and thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.